بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Ali bin Jassim, Secondary School for Boys, English Department, 2015-2016. A model lesson entitled Discussion Essay on Medical Experiments on Animal, presented by Walid Darwish. As a starter, I displayed this question and I asked my students, do we have the right to do medical experiments on animal? After that, I presented my objectives. Do we have the right to do medical experiments on animals?
If we make a new medicine,
Yeah.
we have to test it on animals. Maybe that medicine is going to kill them. We are not sure yet, so we have to test it on
Okay,
animals.
that's our lesson today. We are going to discuss this issue. Our objectives are identifying the layout of discussion essay, how to write an essay, a discussion essay, fill in a spidergram with persuasive techniques, match 6 arguments with their evidence and names of techniques, write a discussion essay on testing on animals, and finally, evaluate a discussion essay using writing rubric. I have a question here. Our lesson is focusing mainly on discussion or argumentative essay. Why have I mentioned persuasive techniques? Raise your hand. Yes?
Because sometimes you have to, or you want to convince the reader on something, so you have to use some persuasive techniques.
So is it argumentative or persuasive? What's the difference? Do we have argumentative techniques in writing here? Bashir? No. In the argumentative essay, is he trying to convince me?
Yes.
Okay, we will see in the following slides. I display the writing prompt, situation and task as the way they are asked in their final exam. And I ask my students what comes directly into your minds once you read a question like this. I began to elicit these answers. After that, I asked them about which topic is mentioned here in the prompt, what type of essay it is, the planning and its importance, and the linkers we need to write. Situation. Read the situation, Anas. And Ahmed, please read the task.
Situation. You have had a close discussion about animal testing in the interest of medical research.
Ahmed,
Task. Write an argumentative essay discussing the pros and cons of medical experiments on animals.
once you have a prompt like this, what should you put in your mind? You should think about the following. Which topic am I going to write about? Which genre, type of essay is it? Planning the details I need to write. And finally, the linkers and introductions for pros and cons and examples. Abdullah, what type of essay is it?
Argumentative.
Argumentative. My first exercise was to identify the layout of discussion essay. I used some strategies such as think, pair, share, pictorial strategy, graphic organizer to suit visual learners. I used the opposing direction program to show that our discussion essay is the same. Faisal Al-Qasim starts by introduction. One of the guests is supporting the issue and the other is opposing, and finally Faisal concludes. This is the same we use in our discussion essay.
like this. And finally, I told my students we need linkers to link all these ideas: introduction, pros, cons, and conclusion.
Medical experiments on animals. You need first to put in your mind a topic, a type of writing. And here I have a question. How is the opposing direction program similar to discussion essay? Yes, Mahmoud?
Because, like these programs, they have two opinions. Everyone is showing his opinion, and he are it's like argumentative.
Or persuasive?
Argumentative.
Yeah, but it consists of what? Two what?
Two opinions.
Yeah.
They making like a discussion.
Okay, so this one is trying to argue or to persuade the audience. Persuade. And the other one also is trying to persuade. An argumentative essay consists of two persuasives in different directions. Does Faisal have the right to give his opinion in the introduction?
No.
They may kill him, yes? Okay, that's what we should do. Never give your opinion in the introduction, in the argumentative essay, okay? Finally, you have to appear at the end and conclude what they have said. So you appear in the introduction and again appear where? In the conclusion, okay? Typically like our planning. Here we have introduction, second paragraph, for third paragraph, against, and finally conclude.
My second exercise was to fill in a spidergram using 6 persuasive techniques, and I used graphic organizer, and as an assessment tool I used random name picker.
Group B.
We can ask a rhetorical question.
Rhetorical question. When we tell a short story about something supporting my opinion, what do we call it? Just in one line. A short story in one line to support my persuasion. What do we call it? Have you heard it before? Anecdote. Anecdote. Can you repeat it? Anecdote.
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 My third exercise was to match 6 arguments with their evidence and techniques. I used matching and snowball fight strategy to suit kinesthetic learners and to engage students into the lesson. I started by giving instructions for the game, and I showed them an example. I used colored papers to suit visual learners. Students were to match 3 papers, argument with justification and the name of the technique.
Do it like that and throw it at your best friend. I know you are all best friends to each other, okay? And we will throw it at each other, okay? Start. Okay? Now, pick one paper, unfold it, and read and search for your group members. Okay? Never look for the same color. Pay attention. Omar?
Animal testing in short, the safety of new drugs as tests can show the effects on humans.
How is that?
As a result, unsafe drugs do not get into the market.
What do we call this?
Cause and effect.
As an integration, I invited a biology teacher because my objective was to teach students about alternative ways of making medicine. And Mr. Mahmoud tried to illustrate how medicine can be made without experimenting on animals.
Hi everybody. Actually, Mr. Reid asked me to talk about using animals in labs for experiments. If this is right or wrong. Actually, this topic is controversial. It causes a lot of debate between scientists and the animal care associations. They say this is cruel, but in fact, after doing researches, the animals we cannot dispense with them to use in labs because they replace humans.
My fourth exercise objectives are to match 4 paragraphs, to identify techniques used to start and end, to match persuasive language with their examples, to fill in a planning diagram, to write a discussion essay, and I use cooperative learning and self-assessment, and finally peer assessment. This exercise was the most differentiated one. I used different worksheets. Differentiation was presented in content, process, and also ways of assessment and the product. I divided my groups into 4 groups according to their levels in the light of first term scores. So my groups were homogeneous. My worksheets were differentiated to suit all learners. First group was reading, to analyze this text and to fill in a planning. My second group was to write an argumentative essay with some aids here, phrases to make an introduction, to introduce for the pros and for the cons, and to make a conclusion. The planning was filled in for them. Group C, a little bit higher achievers, were not given any aids here in the writing, but they were given the planning filled in. And for group D, the highest achievers weren't given any aids here, and the planning was not fully filled in. And I gave each group a useful language box taken from the main resource and the planning itself from the main resource.
Exercise 4 for group 1, so write using these details. So, you have these details. You arguments against. Remember this. Have you ever thought about like that? Good. Next time.
One that supports
Now, I want you to fill in these details here. Okay? Do it. 5 minutes left.
Yeah, the topic on what is it? Animal? Yeah, as he said. For the assessment, I use two ways of assessment: self-assessment and peer assessment. Okay, I asked each group to read the essay, which was to be shown on the board. I divided the roles among group members and asked the leader to calculate the given scores from his group members. Each group knew what to do. They used this rubric to assess their own work and finally to assess other groups' work. I used Cam Scanner program on my mobile to scan students' work, and I shared it via Bluetooth to my laptop, and I displayed it on the board for the groups to do peer assessment for other groups. Finally, I rewarded the winning group.
Each group will have a writing rubric now. I want you to make a self-assessment. Do your role, play your role. Abdurrahim, for example, will only assess paragraph 1. The same for Bashir and Ali and Anas. Ibrahim, okay, group B. Out of 16. 14. We will see. Group C. Out of 16.
15.5.
We will also see.
1.5.
And group D. 16. Okay, and group A. 11. Okay, now I want you to assess your peers' work. Okay, I display it and you will assess it in the same way and tell me if they deserve this. Okay? Group A has the planning and I display it. Let's display the planning first. Has a topic, okay? Argument for justification, argument for justification. Okay?
Which group?
No conclusion. This is group A. Okay. Out of 16, what do you think?
4.
Because they don't have two arguments against.
Yeah. Hey.
And don't have what? Conclusion.
8 or 6.
What do you say?
4.
4.
3.8.
What do you say?
6.
6. And you?
5.
5. So it will be 5. Okay? Let's have another color. 5. Okay. Let's move to a different group. This is, which group is it?
B.
D. Okay. We are going to read it. I put it just for a while. Read and try to assess it. Look for what? Introduction stating the topic, telling me it's argumentative, 2 arguments for, 2 arguments against, conclusion which weighs and summarize arguments. Okay? You have 2 minutes to assess it. Have you ever, can you read, Abdul Latif?
Have you ever thought about the effect of medical experiments on animals? There are many advantages and disadvantages about this topic.
What's our topic here?
Medical experiments on animals.
What type of writing?
argumentative.
Because we have.
Advantages and disadvantages.
Good. Let's move to the following paragraph. Abu Shannon.
There are a number of advantages to medical experiments on animals. Firstly, a lot of life-saving medical treatments have been successfully developed using animal tests, especially on mice. For example,
Okay, go on.
we share 95% of our genes with a mouse, making them an effective model for the human body.
Okay. 14 and 8. 16, so it's 38. 38, it will be about 13. Winners are Group B. Please give them. Thank you very much.
Thank you.